Welcome back to the Pro Physique Code, y'all.
So
What's
much
up,
energy.
Lexie? What's up, Stephen?
What is good? We've got well, I don't want to say a new group today, but we've got Stephen joining us.
Well, we're mixing it up because
Yeah.
Coach Stephen has got some insights on this their topic today, which is dangerous prep protocols.
I'm like the margarita mix, right?
Margarita, you're the sour. You're definitely the sour mix.
Yeah. Dang it. Ah, crap.
I'm the tequila. You're the sour mix, and that just means that Lexi, you're like an orange liqueur that we mix in. I don't.
Or it could be you might have salt on the sides.
You're not salty.
I know. I'm
Maybe
not. Like,
you know what? Maybe it's one of those margaritas with sugar on the rim. You're the sugar.
I am
This
salty though.
analogy is falling apart.
I'm salty about the topic we're about to talk about.
Oh, you know what? You be
And so
salty.
we can make it work. Because like I told you guys before we started this episode, just sometimes the things I hear that coaches have clients do makes me very mad.
So let's start the podcast off just by saying this. If you're following any of us and you ever have a question, we love answering, because contest prep is clouded in mystery. Even after coaching for a decade, I still have people reaching out to me with a lot of false assumptions about what prep should be. Competitors in general just accept that prep is going to be hard. And so they sometimes accept that these are the protocols because they're told by coaches that seem like authority figures, but are also morons who have never actually done these protocols themselves, or they just don't care about the science behind it, right? So there's this balance between evidence-based coaching where we pay attention to what is right, but we also win, okay? And I think for a long time there was this idea that you can't do both. You can do prep in a healthy manner, or you can win. That's not true, okay? We're going to talk about some of these things. We're going to give some raw data, some numbers. Yeah, and we'll give some examples. I've got some, when you brought this topic up, Lexi, I said, I've got a couple messages recently from girls telling me their story. And I think it's just a good topic because it's the time of year where a lot of people are getting into competing. And there's always this, I'm always reminded how much the competition world changes, right? I've been doing this now full time for more than 11 years. Sometimes I realize on my Instagram, I'm following somebody and I'm like, man, who is that? They've gotten married, so their Instagram name changed, but I'll scroll back and I'll be like, oh my gosh, I coached this girl 8-9 years ago. Now she's, now she's living a whole different life. But I'm like, but at the same time, hundreds of people are reaching out to us for coaching each month for prep. So like there is this changing of so it's very easy for information to kind of get, I think, swept under the rug, right? You constantly have to recreate the information. So that's what we're going to do today. We're recreating.
You mean like when people are like, you've done this video already, and you're like, yeah, yeah, I have.
Oh yeah. I mean, so because of our transformation challenge, what I'm doing this week on my YouTube channel is I'm actually putting up some of the interviews I've done with our past like winners. And someone said, well, you posted this, video already. And I said, yeah, but you got to understand, I've added 180,000 subscribers since I posted this video. So just because you've been following me for 6-7 years, I get, between, 5 and 15,000 subscribers each month that they don't watch my old videos. They just watched one video and liked it. So yeah, you got to constantly put out information. You can't ever go, oh, I did a video on how to do pull-ups 15 years ago. That's no one's watching that. Sorry.
Yeah. No, I only had my YouTube channel for like 2 years, but sometimes I refrain from saying, oh, I made that video like a year or two ago, because I'm like, I'm kind of sometimes embarrassed by the old content. I don't know. I hate watching like old videos of myself.
Yeah, you and the platform changes, the quality of audio, the video, the editing changes. Like now we're watching it on our phones. Used to, when I started YouTube, everyone watched it on a computer. Now most people watch it on their phone. So you've got to keep with the times and keep information coming out. And also, I think if you put out any content consistently, you've got to have thick skin. You've got to ignore the morons. You've got to ignore the people that are just negative, that are just sad with their own life. Because here's the thing, I've never once watched something on YouTube, not liked it, and left a comment about how dumb that person was. I just don't go back. So I never really understood the idea that someone's like, yeah, you lost all that weight, but now you look skinny or something. I'm like, okay. Or like
It's
the
just,
video yesterday, the comments are, she looked sexier before. And I'm like,
oh, I saw you posted that in your story. The way
in
I
what
look at
world
it,
does that matter? You liked her,
Right.
you liked her without abs because you're fat and you're never gonna have abs. That's like my
don't
opinion.
you wonder who those people really are though? Like behind the computer. Like
It's very, very insecure. That's
I
all it
feel
is.
like it's like some like 60, no, not maybe not 60 year, but like 40, 50-year-old living in like their parents' basement playing video games and like I
I
don't
mean,
know. I
that's the
just
picture we paint. I don't think it's that. I don't think it's
yeah.
I
always
wish
that.
my
I think
mom
it's
had a
literally
basement
just
for me to live in.
people justifying their own existence, their own lack of willpower. You know, when a woman loses 30 pounds of body fat and looks very athletic, and you say she looked better before, A, you're lying. Okay. B, she was unhappy. She's the one that decided to make the change. So what the flip does her changing her life have any negative impact on you? Like she did it for you. Oh, she was sexier before. I just go, okay.
I don't
Yep.
think it speaks to, how oftentimes I think we just make our own opinion too important. Like we think that our own opinions can
Right.
sometimes be
I
the end all be
literally,
all.
someone argued with me yesterday. Like I went back and forth with one of them. And at the end, someone said, well, you're putting content on the internet. You have to be willing to hear people's opinions. And I said, I heard your opinion. I just don't want it here on my channel. So I'm blocking you forever. You'll never comment on a video of mine again. Like it's that simple to me. It's not a democracy. It's I am the YouTube tater on my channel.
Yeah. I love it. No, I mean you nailed it a second ago, Paul. It just I think people the way I look at it is, and this is just in life in general, anytime somebody wants to just be negative towards something you're doing that's positive for yourself. I think it's just a reflection of them and like them seeing what you're doing reminds them of the discipline that maybe they don't have or like reminds them of an insecurity they have. So by putting you down, it just in a weird way or in a not a weird way, but in a, awful way, it makes them feel better about themselves.
And it's
Well,
important for all you guys to remember that I give Paul lots of negativity as it is. So like,
even
trust me,
gives
I got it
me
covered.
even gives me the opposite of what I'm expecting. So
You
like
never know what to expect with Stephen.
Stephen is the contrarian. So whatever is going on with you, he's going to give you the opposite. I'll give you an example. At the Olympia, when Daraja made it into the final four call out, it was just before that, and she was in the 4 or 5 position because they had 9 on stage, and they moved her into 4 or 5. And it was either her or Laura Lee that was 4th, right? And so when they start the final call out and they start naming, Steven goes, I think Daraja clearly has Laura Lee beat. And I'm like, what? Dude, you never have my back. And I'm over here nervous. And I'm like, no, Laura Lee's clearly going to be in the top 4, not Daraja, So he's like, see, I told you. But I'm like, what if I would have said Daraja, you would have said Laura Lee. So Steven loves to go oppo, whatever your current mood is. Yeah.
Hey, so somebody's got to be there to even you out,
I
We
agree. And listen, that's one thing I always appreciate about Steven. Steven always says, like, people don't tell you the truth, Paul, sometimes. And I'm like, well, you do. So we're good.
I mean, it's true. And I think, before we get too caught off and off onto a negative, like a different subject, not in that context, but like every so often somebody's going to tell you something you don't like. Sometimes you do need to like be open to saying, okay, is this viable? Is this valid feedback?
Yeah, for sure. Listen, you don't get better by just being yes manned and being told how great you are. And so, yeah, like you definitely need that aspect. And that's one thing about bodybuilding is that, gosh, you get punched in the mouth every weekend. I'll be like, man, I'm coming in to win this show and 5th place. And you're like, geez, okay, you got to go back to the drawing board. So the sport of bodybuilding will humble you quickly. But
It
that's
will. And I think
kind of the
it's
fun of it.
like our job. I don't know about you guys, but I feel like I'm having to tell people a lot more oftentimes like what they need to hear, which isn't always what they want to hear. But I feel like the clients that grow the most and do the best are usually the ones that are just like open to that. Like you said, you don't really want a yes man. That's not like what purpose is that serving, you know?
Nope.
I
Nope.
mean, I think that's how people kind of get caught up in this stuff sometimes, though, right? Like, because I almost feel like as an athlete, oftentimes we're told to be like this yes person, like do what I'm telling you to do because I told you to do it and because I'm the coach, because like Paul said, I'm in the position of authority, so to speak. And so we can get in this habit of not necessarily maybe questioning some of the stuff that we're doing or the practices, the protocols that we're, being given, and just be like, yep, coach said it, I do it. And like, it can mess you up. Like, it can leave you in a pretty tough spot, which, I mean, I think all of us have seen quite a few people coming out of those places.
Well, let's start off the prep with this. I'm going to read you a message I got. Okay. And so to preface this, I know this person. Obviously not going to bring up her name, but she's a competitor that when I saw her compete, I thought, wow, this girl's going to the Olympia. I saw I saw her turn pro. I saw her at her pro debut. I can't obviously say any more because people can figure that crap out quick. She chose a coach to help her, who is a very predatory coach. He goes in girls' DMs, he asks them out on dates, he tells them he can get them pro cards, Olympia, whatever. And I do not do that. I don't even talk to girls at shows. I stay in my lane. And if they reach out to me, great. Not that, that's not what this is about. But my point being, when I saw that this young lady had chosen to work with this coach, my immediate reaction was like, too bad. She could have been really good. But some coaches just have a history of taking girls that are in a good, healthy spot, running them into the ground. They may have a short term of success, and then they disappear from the sport for a year or two or more. So here's the message. Coached by team such and such. Horrendous prep. Fat at 4 grams. No carbs for weeks. Tons of oral steroids and high PED dosages. Just posted for the first time in weeks, and I messaged my friend, and she said she has liver failure and that the doctor is in a combo of protocols due to her excessive cardio, caloric restriction, and PEDs. So she hasn't competed in 2 years, and this was a girl that was really talented. So, and then she just said, it had me thinking about how appreciative I am when you tell me, no, we're not going lower than this on calories. We're not going higher than this on cardio. So yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
and the concern I have is that type of stuff goes on, and I don't know if the competitors feel shame. They don't feel compelled. They stop posting, but it needs to be more. Because, we can't be the ones that are vocal about it because we are coaches, and it just comes off as like sour grapes, right? So that's why I'm not more demonstrative about it. Maybe at a time when I'm done coaching, I will be, because I will care less about impacting people that are still involved in the sport. But in my mind, the way to make this sport better is to show how to do it, right? Not talk bad about others. We can talk about protocols that we believe in, but for me, it's about, okay, I'm just going to show the way that it can be done, because I'm still figuring this out. It's not like there was no blueprint set. I am doing things, we are doing things that were not done in this sport, and now they are common practice. When I hear someone use the word diet break, I go, cool. That's something I introduced as a coach into the competing world. I'm quite certain me, Stephen, our first couple prep coaches were the first ones to do this on a consistent basis. Now I hear people say it on the internet, and I'm like, cool, that's awesome. So there are still things that are coming up about this sport, but for some reason there is still this acceptance that this death spiral approach to nutrition and cardio is acceptable.
Yeah, and I think, another thing that I see us being not necessarily part of our job, something we all like to do and why we're doing this podcast is to educate, competitors out there. Because some people just don't know what they don't know, especially first time competitors, right? It's not just high level competitors being taken advantage of, but a lot of times it's a lot of those new competitors that just don't know any different. But I do think that at the end of the day, as an athlete getting into this sport, knowing that it is an extreme sport. There's no way around that. But I think that you have to also do your due diligence as a client. Do your research on your coach before.
It's hard. It's so Lexie, I agree with you there, but you got to understand, when people are new to this sport, they tend to look at the people that are the loudest and the people that are saying the most. And sometimes those are the most dangerous people, They're
Yeah.
also tend to be associated with some very well-known athletes, sometimes because there's a monetary or financial benefit for the athlete, right? So you don't always know. You go, oh, I see this athlete, they look really good. This is their coach. I'm going to go down this rabbit hole. And also these, coaches, the successful ones are often charismatic. They know how to use the right keywords. They know how to sound like they know what they're talking about. So it literally sometimes takes a person a couple years being involved in this sport, being backstage at a show. You know how many times I've had girls be like, I was at a show and I didn't realize I was on this terrible approach. And I'll be like, yeah, that's terrible. You're on it.
Yeah, it is. I mean, that is true. It's like you don't know what you don't know, especially being new into this sport. I guess the best way to kind of like rephrase that is if you are new in the sport, I think don't just jump the gun super quickly with like, okay, the first person you find, hire them. Like, don't act on that like immediate kind of instinct. Maybe do a little bit more,
You know what
deep.
my favorite athlete to get is somebody who preps themselves for a show, right?
Yeah.
They've tried to figure things out on their own. They've done it. They might have even done well. I've had girls come to me that were like, top 2, top 3 at nationals without ever having a coach. Then they go, okay, I've talked to a lot of girls. I've seen your competitors at shows. Let's have a conversation about what prep would look like, right? And sometimes it's a perfect match. They just needed a little bit of guidance, right? They didn't
Mhm.
they didn't do anything dangerous because they trusted their own instincts versus being put
Right.
on a plan by a coach and being told this is how it is, and you go against my better judgment, I'm going to do this plan.
So
Yeah.
I think that walks hand in hand with people being in a rush to compete and get on stage in general. Like maybe they see the stage and they see the sparkles and the glitz and the glam, and obviously it gets made up to be a big thing, which it can be. But if you're in a rush to do it and like say, okay, I tried to do it myself, it wasn't happening. Like a lot of people out there make a living on just putting people on stage and that's it. So what comes after that's not necessarily
Right.
a consideration for them. So yeah, maybe you do this really aggressive, crazy protocol, and sure, yeah, if you starve yourself, you're going to get leaner, right? So man, maybe you make it on stage that one time, but then maybe afterwards, like,
Yep.
like you said, you're not getting back on stage again, or at least not anytime soon, because the aftermath of that then comes in. And I think that it also has to do with like that rush that almost like I have to get on stage or I have to do this or I'm going to make this happen no matter what. And it goes back to like what you said. Yeah, it's hard, but where does that line get drawn of like what's acceptable hard and doing it in a best practice, best manner versus what's like, okay, I'm literally just going to starve you and to hell with whatever the hell happens
Well, let's
after.
get into some specifics because I think that'll really help people understand what it is we're talking about.
Mhm.
So I don't know, did you have some example, Lexi? Because I know you were talking about that.
Well, yeah. So, kind of going back to your example before, Paul, because I think it's kind of good to maybe share some like examples that are coming. Like these are real people, real DMs. I put up a question on my Instagram last night, just asking people like if they had horrendous prep protocols they wanted to share. Obviously, I'm going to keep these anonymous, but I noticed a very common trend of a lot of people saying like no carbs, no fat, just protein. And we're not just talking like for a week or like the last 2 weeks of prep. Like some of these people were saying they were doing this for like almost the entirety of their prep or for like 10 plus weeks at a time. Some people mentioned like there was one person that mentioned 3 ounces of tilapia, 3 spares of asparagus for all of the meals. And this was for like the entirety of prep. So there seems to be this commonality and this pattern of these like extremely either high protein diets with no fat and no carbs for long periods of time, or these super like just rigid meal plans where it's literally like the same meal for all meals out of the day. So it seems to be that kind of common trend
Yeah.
of what I'm noticing with what people are kind of chiming in and sharing with me.
I think that's a common approach for, and I could be wrong here, but like personal trainers that someone like one of their clients goes, you know what, I'd like to do a prep. And they like just Google like a prep. I don't know. I don't know where this comes from. I know coaching, you coach the way you were coached, right? So if you're a coach and you came from a certain approach, you tend to kind of go that direction.
Well, that's what I'm seeing too, a lot of, and then this isn't always the case, but I do see that happening where you'll have a coach who maybe they're like a really good athlete and a client is attracted to that coach because they're a good athlete, but that coach only coaches the way they've ever known, which is how they've been coached, right? And they're not willing to coach differently based on the client. They just do what they've always known, which may be tilapia only, asparagus, like that. I see that happening a lot too, or I hear of that a lot.
Yep.
Yeah, it's and so I mean it's obviously it's old school stuff. You know, we used to hear like, oh yeah, tilapia thins the skin. You know, asparagus helps thin the skin. It's like, no, they're just really, really low calorie options.
Well, you
So,
actually
like,
had a little experience on this because when I met you, Stephen, you were in prep and you were on a pretty restrictive meal plan type approach.
bro, I mean, I literally have it somewhere. Give me a second. Like, I remember every morning I would have like half a grapefruit for my first prep and like a salad with like, it was supposed to be apple cider vinegar and olive oil with chicken for lunch. And I was like, man,
Yeah.
like
A lot
grapefruit makes me
of
want to hurl.
magical ingredients that just seem like they work because it's not that you're eating 800 calories, but it's because you're having apple cider vinegar, right? Like I think that's where these things come from. Um, I often say I was fortunate to find my first coach because he was doing things in such a different manner. But I also think I wouldn't have done it if I had to do it the way Stephen did it. I don't think my body would have responded well. I mean, I would have just disappeared to nothing, right? So let's talk about the actual mechanics of protein, carbs, and fats and what their roles are and why they're important and why you can have carbohydrates and why you must have nutritional fat in a prep to retain your masculinity, your femininity, your like humanity. Like you're talking about long-term hormonal, digestive, and mental issues associated with long-term restriction of these things. I mean, gosh, like people should be put in jail if they put somebody on a no fat, no carb diet. That's literally how dangerous that is.
Yeah, I mean, so protein's pretty straightforward. You don't ever really have to worry about protein, right?
Well,
Protein
let's
helps
talk
people.
about why it's straightforward and let's talk about what's the problem with a 120-pound athlete on 200 grams of protein. I think that's another common thing is the high protein approach.
Or you mean like when I was on 400 grams of protein when we first met?
Bro, I tried that. I bought a Flex
Yeah.
magazine or something in the 90s and I was like, oh, that's why I'm skinny. I'm not eating enough protein. I was so bloated from trying to eat 400 grams of protein a day. I was like, how is this even possible?
I was going to say, were you
Yeah.
going to the bathroom? Like that's where I always
Yeah.
see an issue with people when I get girls who
I had
have.
to work 3 jobs. You don't realize 400 grams of protein is expensive.
It's
Oh
expensive.
yeah, yeah. Oh
Yeah, so
god.
you would say most people would probably have a hard time with the digestion as well, but I am what I like to call a pooping champion, so I was okay personally.
Okay.
But like the reason people like to go heavy and hard on the protein is because one, there's this idea that you can just eat as much protein and it will help you grow more muscle and stuff. It's like, yes, it is what like we refer to as the adaptive macronutrient. So if you have a meal and you eat enough protein and that, yes, your body will say, I'm going to build muscle and repair muscle just there. But you have to have enough time in between meals. The theory is called the refractory period of protein theory, and it gets a little bit too in depth, but you have to have enough time for those protein levels or amino acids in the blood to come back down to baseline before you can trigger muscle growth again with your nutrition. But the other big thing about that is it has the highest what we call thermic effect of food. So you have to break protein down into amino acids. You have to shuttle amino acids down to the liver, and then those have to be converted into glucose to be used as carbohydrates and fuel. So the amount of energy that it takes to break down that 4 calories of protein to get the 4 calories out of there offsets the 4 calories in the protein a little bit, right? Carbs have a little bit of a thermic effect, fats have almost none. So you can overeat on protein pretty damn comfortably without having to worry about getting the same kind of fat gain or being in the same kind of energy surplus that people tend to associate with carbohydrates or fats.
Now, remind me now, I remember this from my textbook, physiology or anatomy. I don't remember which one, but there's a hormone called PPY, right? It's the hormone that satiates and protein spikes that more than any of the other macros,
Is
correct?
one of them. So
Okay.
so there's still like the dynamics of hunger and satiety. PPY is one of them. Obviously, ghrelin, leptin are other ones as well. And then there's some other new theories about things that might be impacting hunger signaling as well. But yeah, PPY is definitely can be one of
I
them.
just remember that always stuck out of my head. Like, I think maybe Campbell asked it on a test or something, but like what, macronutrient increases PPY the most, um, so that always stuck out to me.
Yeah, and it does. It tends to be the most satiating
Yeah.
food source, right? It takes longer to digest. It's more complex of how it is in its structure, and it just sits in your stomach nice and heavy, unless you're just drinking protein shakes, I guess. So it does tend to like, if you're gonna go really low calorie on stuff, there's a bunch of reasons why you would stick to high protein because it's gonna make you more able to stick to the low calories and obviously have less, we'll say, fat gain
Yeah,
associated
and
with it.
obviously of all the macronutrients, it's the most that it's positively associated with our sport. Everyone knows protein is important. So a new bodybuilder gets a plan and it's like, you're eating chicken or tilapia 5 times a day. You go, oh, cool, I'm a bodybuilder. That you just associate it with that. So I think that's why protein is the most accepted. The problem becomes when you eliminate the other one. So let's talk about nutritional fat the next, because I think that's the one that for me, in the order of variability, protein doesn't vary that much in prep.
No.
Fat varies a little bit, carbohydrates the most, right? So let's talk a little bit about nutritional fat and why we have thresholds.
So, I mean, obviously, fat soluble vitamins, right? So it's A, D, E, and K, if I'm remembering correctly off the top of my head.
So explain what that means when you say fat soluble, because I don't think a lot of people understand that. They don't realize the importance of fat in digestion.
So yeah, so water soluble, we know what that means, right? Like we put water on something, it starts to kind of dissipate and break down. So other things need dietary fats to break down. And that's what we mean when we say fat soluble. So you need fats for your fat soluble vitamins. All of your cell membranes are made of lipids, which are fats. So any kind of new cell growth, that kind of stuff, fats are important. Obviously, it can also help with digestion in general, just making sure things are moving through and you feel good about it. But
Well,
I
if
think
you're not digesting or absorbing those vitamins and minerals that are fat soluble, I mean, that's going to mess up digestion.
of course, and it's going to have an impact on, of course, how you feel, your general levels of
Yeah.
fatigue, your performance, all the rest of the stuff. So really important on a few things, but I think what we normally talk about most with it is that all of your sex hormones, so like things like testosterone, estrogen, are what we call cholesterol derivative, which means they are made of cholesterols. So obviously fats and cholesterols are very important if we want to have healthy hormones, and particularly for things like bodybuilding, and I would say even for general health. Like for guys, if you're super low fat and your testosterone gets in the toilet, like you're probably going to be depressed. You're gonna be like, why am I sad all the time? Like I don't normally care about this TV show. You're not going to want to go after things like your libido are going to take a hit. Like it's so for men, it's big in quality of life. For women, obviously, we're talking about like reproductive health, hormonal health, your performance in the gym, your ability to hold on to muscle, and which is half
Well,
of the battle for
just to
bodybuilding.
bring this back to like what we see on a common basis, when people come to us that have been on these terrible preps, they are complaining about motivation, digestion, hair loss for women. Like you see some pretty crazy things when you do these approaches.
Yeah,
Mhm.
and so and that's not even talking about like the longer term stuff that they might not realize, like the fact that they might be doing like creating issues with bone density or some other things, right? The hair loss, I think, is the easy one for saying that probably thyroid health is not in a great spot, which I normally associate or I see, I think, with the low carbohydrate diets in particular. I feel like the fats really affect those sex hormones. And yes, they absolutely can have a downstream effect on just about everything because like the body works with itself, right? So if one thing goes off, that can kick something else off and kind of create a downstream effect of other things that are no longer working correctly. But carbohydrates, absolutely. So those super low carbohydrate diets can have a negative impact on thyroid hormone. And I'm like way too deep into like some endocrinology journal articles on it right now.
You need to have like a
Well,
science.
before we move on to carbohydrates, let's talk numbers. Let's talk numbers for protein, because we didn't do that before we moved on. So protein for an athlete, for general population, my favorite way to describe it is like, what's your goal weight? Like if you're trying to lose weight, what's the weight that you felt the best at? That's about how many grams of protein per pound, within reason. You can even reasonably go below that. As bodybuilders, I don't know anybody that eats less protein than their current body weight, if they're leanish, right?
Yeah, yeah. And some
That's
people
rough.
just like some competitors in general, I'll usually you kind of get to know the client, but some people just they like a little bit of extra protein.
Yep.
And some people they will be very honest, like I hate protein. I don't, hit it easily.
Same.
So they're on the lower threshold, whereas people like I love protein, so mine is a little bit on the higher threshold in comparison to my body weight. So there's a little bit of like give with that too.
Yeah, and I find that will even change in prep. I have some people that are very close to their body weight in protein at the beginning of prep, but as they lose 20, 30 pounds, if they're men, or 10, 15 as they're women, they might crave a little more protein at the end of prep, or they might be a little more on the savory side. So they might get another 15 or 20 grams of protein at the end of prep. And I find that to be beneficial, for the same reasons. You're getting some satiety. However, I have never had a girl over 200 grams of protein a day, ever.
Yeah.
Yeah, I actually saw it's funny you bring up that number because I saw some a post on Facebook the other day from like in this bodybuilding forum group and somebody was talking about struggling to hit their protein and they were like commenting that they're on 200 grams and I'm just like, Jesus, that is a lot for a female.
That's a lot for me. I'm a 200 something pound man, and I hit there's the many days where I look at the end of the day and I'm like, God, I've only had 140 grams of protein. I got to go have 60, like
Yeah.
it's an
Off-season
effort.
versus dieting problems.
And honestly, like
Yeah.
you said before, Paul, it's expensive. I feel like the bulk of my grocery bill just comes from like the most expensive stuff I buy is always just the protein, you know? So gosh, I can't imagine what that bill looks like.
Yeah, and there's definitely research out there that supports that maybe a higher protein intake, especially when you are getting to really low levels of body fat and or dieting harder, to help preserve more muscle, and that can be helpful. Obviously, we know that as we age, so as you're getting older, higher protein intakes can be helpful. But we really just in the research have not seen a deleterious impact on healthy people with high protein intakes. There's so like maybe if you have some kidney diseases and stuff you want to worry about, that's maybe a concern. But for healthy individuals, in terms of high end on protein intake, they have had people eat a hell of a lot of protein with zero negative impacts on function there. So
Yeah. Okay. So now we can dig into the numbers on fats, because I think that's where anyone that's on a meal plan, first of all, if you're on a meal plan and you've never tracked, plug your meal plan into an app. I think, when you look at a meal plan, it might look great, but when you plug in the numbers on paper, and like this person messaged me, they were on trace fats, which worked out to 4 grams a day for months. And now they're having organ failure. Like, this is major life stuff for a damn bodybuilding trophy. That's completely unnecessary, right? So let's talk about like where those numbers are, maybe in terms of percentages of calories or, macros.
so
Yeah.
I say like 20%, right, as a bottom end is good for normal people. Like, okay, I'm having at least 20% of my calories coming from fats, just for anybody and everybody that's not doing anything.
Yeah.
So that
Yeah.
typically straightforward.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
I
think
think Lane's book, he had 20% as the low end, and then he's had people as low as 17%, but you're talking about like specific phases of prep, like that's not and something I've been experimenting with over the last couple of years is I'll actually do, because I used to typically do on my refeed days when carbs were up, I would drop fats. Now I'll actually increase fats on the days I increase the carbs, because it helps with digestion.
yeah.
And you maybe get a little hormonal benefit from bumping those fats up. Even just 5 or 10 grams can make a big difference at the end of prep.
Those are
Yeah.
rookie numbers. You got to pump them up, bro.
Well, I know we've talked about this before too on previous episodes, but I know a number for fat specifically that I think it kind of applies for a lot of the female athletes we work with is that like 40 gram, once you start to get below 40 grams of fat on a daily basis, that's usually when, I mean, I know we will do it, but it's usually towards the tail end of prep and for short spurts of time, right? So if we're getting into like the 30s, we're doing it for maybe just a very short period of time and then pulling back, right? But I know
Yep.
that that 40-gram number is a number that I know that none of us really like to have to get below. Not to say we're not going to do it at the end of prep, but if we do, it's going to be for very short spurts of time.
Yep.
Yeah, I
Yep.
think 35 is my bare bones bottom end short term
Yeah.
for
Yep.
women. And I actually keep it a little bit higher for men. So I really realistically, I don't like going under 60 for the guys. Now, I think the guys are a little bit different of a story on this because obviously, if you know the sport, you know that there are plenty of guys who get testosterone from outside of their body. And so the impacts on their testosterone production are going to be different because it's already essentially shut down if you're taking it from out an external source. But women, really, really important. I will try and keep my female athletes at 45 as long as humanly possible. And in fact, oftentimes I'll play with carbohydrate intake or cardio many times before I go below that 40-45 range for fats.
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah.
Fat is, again, like you said, it's one of those things. It's a requirement that you take in a good amount of nutritional fat, get it from good sources. I mean, I even like to have my competitors on a good fat supplement just to make sure they're getting that full range. Because most people, when their calories get restricted, they're not having fats from different sources. They'll get all their fats from like one or two sources. So sometimes supplementation can be essential. And then, we can talk also about the benefits of diet breaks and refeeds on the process. But first, let's talk about carbohydrates, because I think for bodybuilders, this is probably the most misunderstood macronutrient where, I mean, every day I get messages like, oh, you can't lose body fat if you have carbs because it spikes your insulin. And I just want to reach through the computer and just, I
Oh,
don't know. I don't know where this insulinogenic model comes from. This idea that if you're eating something and it spikes your blood insulin, all of a sudden you shut off fat burning for the next 14 years or something, or whatever, even if it's a few hours. I don't know where this comes from. Like, it's absolutely not based in anything other than kind of fear mongering amongst weird offsets of people that hate carbohydrates. I don't know. Stephen, help me out. Where's it come from?
So, I mean, I would say the evidence doesn't support it right now. And so here's the hard thing that people get caught up on that goes back to what we were talking earlier with making choices and being informed. Like, you can find some studies that might show it, but when you look at the majority, like the totality of the evidence that is out there, it doesn't support it. I like to
Well,
think
let's
of it
talk
as like
about,
the insulin
because
wizard.
I like
Equals
talking
fat
about it
loss.
from the foundation of what is insulin.
Yeah, I mean, it shuttles nutrients into the muscle. So insulin's job is to
Wait,
keep
but
your
you
body in
said you
homeostasis.
said to the muscles. You didn't say to the fat
It's
cells.
to tissue in general, right?
Right. And that's like when you open up that textbook right there, it says insulin is anabolic.
Yeah. Yeah. It helps to grow, repair,
Yes.
and then of course to keep your blood sugar in a place where you're not dying.
You need to spike your insulin to be a healthy human being. Okay. Insulin is going to help you shuttle those nutrients.
Yeah.
It does not prevent fat loss, especially if you're in a caloric deficit. That's the whole definition. So this is where, now obviously caloric restriction involves managing your carbohydrates, but the idea that, everyone should be on, 50 grams of carbs a day. Oh,
Well, I mean, I also think of the history of bodybuilding, insulin has been a drug that bodybuilders have used over a long, like forever.
well, I
Like,
think
so
some of
if
them
it was so
famously were
bad,
using insulin and eating like 1,000 grams of carbs. Like this
yeah.
has been a part of the process of building muscle.
But I'm not telling you to do insulin. Don't take that out of context, anybody.
Oh
But
no.
I'm just
Well,
saying,
here, you get that wrong, you'll die.
yes.
So
But
don't do it.
if it was so bad, like, why would people like use it for bodybuilding purposes as well?
Right.
It it's important for life. Carbohydrates, yeah, maybe you'll get a little bit more insulin response. But
Well, and type 1 diabetics have to take insulin to live. So, and they're some of the most fit people.
yeah,
Look at Danica, one of our coaches. She is, diabetic and she's obviously shredded year round. It does not ruin her physique because she actually injects insulin.
Yeah, I mean, you want to see, like, when you look at your day, you want to see kind of a normal, like, spike
Yes.
at
Yeah.
every couple hours, like, kind of just like a little bit of a wave, like a roadmap. Like, you want to see that.
Yeah. And I think that's another, if we're going to go into dangerous prep protocols, I'm not a big fan. And Stephen, you love to I want your opinion on this.
Who?
Having your athletes check their blood glucose levels.
Never.
I want to hear
Never
about that.
once. So, and I kind of put it back to, and it really makes me remember when I was doing cardiac rehab and I was looking at EKG monitors while people were exercising, and one of them just went batshit crazy, and I lost my mind. And I started talking to the other people there, and they're like, "Stephen, look at them." I'm like, "Okay, yeah, they look like they're fine." They're like, "Yeah, it's probably just a leads loose or something, right?" Look for symptoms. Like, look for symptoms. If something's wrong, you're going to have a symptom and something's going to be off.
Mhm.
Because your blood sugar should change throughout the day. That's normal stuff. You just
Yeah.
ate. You ate something that's quicker digesting. You ate something that's slower digesting. That's normal stuff. But like, you are normally going to be able to tell if you're hypoglycemic to where it's a problem. Like,
Right.
homeostasis is a range, right? That's why, like, okay, we have this range of where the doctors typically want to see fasted blood glucose. And then if we're a little bit over that, maybe we're pre-diabetic. So it's not like, yeah, it's a concern, but you're not there yet, right? We have ranges. So we try and I think that it just stresses people out more, which then creates like this cortisol response, which just makes things worse. So I'm not personally a fan of having people, unless of course, yes, you are a type 1 or type 2 diabetic. Yeah, you better be checking it. But if you're a healthy individual and you don't have that metabolic disease, I do not recommend that people keep track of their blood glucose levels on a regular basis. Not unless there's a reason, if you're having a symptom, if something's going on. And normally your doctor will tell you.
I mean, what you just said right there is I do think that for a lot of people, a lot of just normal people, like being told that to test their blood glucose all the time is going to stress them out, right? And that's also another thing that we want to manage really well in prep is that cortisol. So I do feel like though, like we are in an age where there's a lot of people out there kind of I don't know if fear mongering is the right word, but posting about how they're doing all these different things. They're testing their blood glucose. They have these spreadsheets where they're literally tracking every
They're
little
reviewing,
detail.
testing blood glucose, reviewing blood work, and
Yep.
giving the implication that they are themselves the authority on hormones
Yep.
and how you should be supplementing. And like, that is a criminal offense. Like, there is no black and white with us. If we feel like our clients are not healthy, we are going to have them go through a hormone therapy clinic that, we have one that we work with that we trust, but they may also have their own doctor. We're not going to prescribe things. And this is, again, where you can get into some troubles. And like this person said in the message they sent me, they were given PEDs, they were given things to take, oral and others, that cause liver freaking failure because they weren't going through a doctor. They were trusting a coach who was sending things across a border in a box, and then they're taking it. Golly, like the to me,
Ugh.
that is just, I don't know. It
It it's
angers me really a lot.
Mhm.
and I just feel like it's so like much more common than
And it's
we.
completely unnecessary. These athletes are not better because they're doing these cloak and dagger protocols and they're so hardcore that, it's quite disgusting. So let's talk now, before I get angry, about carbohydrates and like the ranges that we see typically with athletes. Um, you know,
Oof.
so I've, ever since our new update system that we've incorporated it, and it actually shows the calories each week, and so I actually now I'm thinking about implementing this. I'm going to have, our engineer maybe do this, but I like to see their current weight with a multiplier of how many calories they're at. 10
Oh,
times their body weight is freaking low, right? So that means if they're 100 pounds and they're at 1,000 calories, that's 10 times. That's when you're like, ooh, right? But I also like to see the other range. Okay, can we get them up to 15, 17, 19 times their body weight in calories while looking lean? Now, and that's the really cool data for me. And the bulk of that is going to be carbohydrates, right? I'm not pumping their protein up to 200, their fats up to 200, you know. So I have some competitors that are 10, 12 weeks post show and they're on 250, 350 grams of carbs, you know, and they're maintaining their weight and they feel good. So I love like talking about those raw numbers. Should everybody do that? No. And I don't want, you know, I've had some guys that I'm either coached or been friends with that made me feel bad because I'm like, man, I'm only eating 300 carbs and this guy weighs less than me and he's eating 600 grams of carbs. Metabolism is a highly individual thing, right? So don't get caught up in like feeling like you're not as good as someone else because, you know, I think I went through that. I was like, oh, maybe I should eat more. No, I just got fat. Like, you know, like, so let's talk numbers, Stephen, because I love to hear your take on the baseline, you too, Lexie, like where your alarm bells go off for carbohydrate intake.
Yeah. So, and then before I get too into it, carbohydrates help prevent muscle protein breakdown. So when you're in a diet,
Protein sparing.
yes, they help you keep muscle, which is again half the battle for you getting on stage. You know, like you said, carbs are really individually dependent, and so I try to look at things relatively, right? Somebody whose stage weight is going to be, 100 pounds is very different than somebody whose stage weight is going to be 140 pounds. You cannot treat them the same with the same numbers. And, everybody has individual genetic and diet history differences and things that are going to impact that. But normally, I don't have a problem with seeing food really, really high. I've had a female client as high as like 500 grams of carbs a day and 100 fats. And she was just an absolute genetic beast.
Macro monster, I call them.
But she was also hip thrusting 600 pounds for like sets of 10. Right. And now I have clients that their carbs max out at like, all right, if we could get to 200, that's like, mwah, right? That's the pizza pie.
And they're freaking out. Some girls, you get out to 150, they're like, I never thought I could eat this much food. And I'm like, man, that's like breakfast for me.
Yep.
Right. But I'll be honest, I do not enjoy, at least at this point, going below 100. Oh God, my voice.
Get off the
So
drug.
I don't like going below 100 grams of carbs at this point.
Mm-hmm.
I just find that like for most people, some people that are smaller body weights, whatever, they can handle it and they can handle it well. But for most people, I feel like what ends up happening is they stop moving as much. Their workouts aren't as good. Their cardio is not as good. So it ends up not really being worth it for those people because they lose so many calories on everything else because they can't feel good. They can't perform well anymore.
It's a compensatory effect. You can't do one thing in prep and affect it and expect it not to change something else. And I think that's, probably coaching, people ask like, what's the biggest difference in coaching? When I first started coaching, you didn't ask people what their job was. You didn't ask what their day was like. You said, where are your macros? What is your cardio? What is your training? Oh, we didn't lose weight this week. Okay. Now we look at this big picture, right? So it's like Stephen's saying, like, yeah, we can pull your carbs down to 70, but if you're also just going to lay on the couch all day, I'd rather you eat 30 more grams of carbs, but be a functional human.
Yeah. I mean, I noticed specifically too, like from my own personal experience, when my carbs get really low, it kind of, it definitely messes with your energy, but when you go into the gym too, for me, sometimes if I know, okay, oh, my carbs are really low, it convinces me that I'm tired, even if I'm necessarily not. Usually I am. And then you just don't give as much during your workouts too. So your workout intensity really diminishes when your carbs are lower. And some of it can just be like that psychological thing too of just knowing, okay, I'm barely getting any food. I'm not going to push as hard in the gym.
I think all of us that are here, so for me, the carbohydrate alarm bell is 10 times their body weight as well, which for, 120-pound person, 120 carbs. That's the alarm bell that I go, okay, now we got to start paying attention to performance and recovery. But we are all at this point having a refeed day.
Yes.
If not multiple refeed days. So, you touched on the fact that carbohydrates are protein sparing, but I want to touch on the psychological and the physiological effect that it has on your performance in the gym and how you look. Because everybody knows that's dieted for a show, that the psychological struggle of you feeling tiny, weak, really can impact you and make you think like, oh, why am I even competing? Why am I dieting? And then you have a high day or 2 high carb days in a row, and you walk in the gym and you're convinced you're going to be Mr. or Miss Olympia. Like it completely changes your performance, your visual look, your mindset. And that should not be discounted. So you should not be doing prep for weeks and weeks and weeks, completely depleted, completely deprived of carbohydrates, if for no other reason than just for the psychological value. But obviously we also know there's a physiological benefit. If your training's suffering, you're gonna eventually start to lose muscle.
Yeah, and I mean, there's other things, and like that, I'm kind of doing this deep dive right now that low carbohydrate intake might actually be bad for thyroid function as well, right? So it's going to negatively impair thyroid function. So if you're too low carb too long, it's going to make it harder for you to lose weight.
Let me ask you this, because I've looked at some of that stuff too, Stephen, and I found that that was also associated with low sodium dieting. So low carb, low sodium can negatively impact those things.
Yeah, and I would say those two tend to go pretty hand in hand with bad prep protocols. They say you can't have any sodium. You have to
That's
do.
why I brought it up.
Yeah.
So if someone's telling you to limit sodium intake, especially like months out from a show, it's a red flag. Like 3,500 milligrams is my like recommended amount for most athletes. I'm telling you, you'll feel like a whole new person if you just take in like some extra sodium before your workout.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And especially I feel like with the lower sodium, that's when you hear a lot of people like complaining, oh, kind of dizzy or a little lightheaded. A lot of times it's that electrolyte that or their electrolyte balance and they need a little bit more sodium.
Yeah, because what happens is that's a big indicator for blood volume, right? And so if you have low blood volume when you stand up real quick, you're gonna get lightheaded because you just don't have the blood to like make it there all the time, right? And so it's super normal, but the sodium is also really important for healthy muscle function. So when for your muscles to work, you have to have enough sodium, potassium, magnesium, those kind of things. Sodium's the one that really shifts and that we see it gets impacted the most. The other ones tend to stay pretty stable, but yeah, the sodium's a big one as well. So even like going back into your calorie expenditure stuff, you don't have enough sodium and salt, you're gonna have a bad workout. Might be cramping up. Like that's a big indicator.
Low blood volume. That's when you can
you're
get
not going to
dizzy.
be able to burn the same calories. You're going to have crap workouts because you're going to feel like crap. And then of course carbohydrates, like glucose is what your brain uses. Like that's what your brain uses for fuel. So when you talk about the mental aspect of stuff, if you're mentally fatigued all the time, it affects everything else.
So
like
this is, I mean, I'll actually prescribe refeed days when people tell me they're starting to forget things and they're not remembering. I'll be like, okay, yeah, you're really depleted. If you're not even
Prep brain.
enough, glycogen to your brain. So I'll say like, okay, we need a couple refeed days, and bam, your mental, state snaps back. So yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, I think not to mention too, like the sodium, the carbs, I mean, even the fat, like when you are put in these positions where you're potentially lightheaded or you're just feeling really foggy, like you go into the gym and you're putting yourself under like a lot of heavy weight. That's just dangerous from a physical standpoint too. You're more susceptible for injuring yourself. So there's that side of things too.
Yes.
Yep. And that's not even getting into like show day practices with water and sodium stuff.
Yeah. Well, something too I want like your guys' take on and I want to briefly touch on would be like we talked about the fats, protein and carbs. I think another kind of somewhat dangerous prep protocol that I see is when like one of the questions or question box answers that I got was somebody who was put on literally the same exact meal, 6 meals out of the day for, I don't know if it was the entire prep, but for a long period of time. And I don't know about you guys, but typically when I get clients who have been on a really, really like strict meal plan in the sense of there's no food variety, like they're eating the copy and paste same thing every day for every meal, those people tend to struggle a lot with their digestion and that side of things for a long period of time after the prep.
Well, this is the foundation of our entire business. So the reason I'm a coach is because everyone was on a meal plan when I started competing, literally everyone. And, Dr. Joe created this idea of flexible dieting, right? That he was the founder of, basically exchanging food sources. So now that there's a lot of research behind all this, we know that there's value in actually getting protein from different sources, carbs from different sources. Like food variability is a very important part of our overall well-being. You can create health issues that would not exist even if your macros were the same, just by eating. You're going to be deficient in things from being so restrictive. However, there was this like hardcore approach for many, you know, this is prep, you're 12 weeks out, this is what you eat for the next 12 weeks. That has hopefully died. Now I hear meal plan has a negative connotation. Oh, you're on a meal plan. And I'm like, hold up. Meal plans are not bad, right? They can be, but the best approach is where you combine the flexibility with a meal plan. You need to plan ahead. You need to prep your meals. You need to make this job easy on yourself. You need to save time, and you know, don't get decision fatigue from trying to figure out 4 meals a day and playing macro Tetris. I think a lot of us have tried that before, and you realize how exhausting it is. So meal plans are not bad as long as they are incorporating some variability. And yeah, you can create an eating disorder. And
You can create, yeah, an eating disorder, but also lots of food intolerances. Because I have a client in particular, and I'm pretty sure she listens to this podcast, but she came from a very big name coach who I will not name, but she was put on a very strict meal plan for so long. And not only did it create not an eating disorder, but you know, for a while she was having some trouble with like binging, right? But we've been working, and we're finally kind of on the mends of things, but we've been working the entire time we've worked together, about like 6-ish, maybe more than that, months now. We've really had to work on building up her food variability again, very slowly, and working on like her digestion, right? Because you can't go from eating, you know, the same 4 food sources for 6 months and then all of a sudden just add in everything under the moon again without your digestion just wreaking havoc. So we've had
it can
to.
also be overwhelming.
Yeah.
Choice can be overwhelming when you go from like no choice to walking through a grocery store and looking around and going, I can eat anything I want. You know, you have to guide them. You have to say, okay, let's just try changing out your carb source from, you know,
Yeah.
rice to like, let's add in a potato, let's add in some veggies, and let's add in some fruit. You can eat a banana. And they're like, well, but banana's bad for you because of the fructose. Okay.
Ah,
Yeah,
Yeah.
like this is literally the, you know, I'm not saying this for no reason. We get these questions.
oh,
Yeah.
dude, somebody was out there saying broccoli's bad for you the other day. We've heard carrots are bad for you. Like, get the fuck out of here. Like, what's wrong? Like, yeah, veggies are so bad for you. Get out. Like, you need veggies, but you guys, like, here's the other thing too. Yeah, you can absolutely wreak havoc on your digestive system and what it's used to and not used to, and create a ton of problems there. But
Mhm.
if you want to get the most out of prep, you need to have a proper and diverse nutrient profile with your micronutrients so that your body can actually be its best.
Yeah.
And that might not mean just eating the same thing every meal. I'm going to say, okay, it doesn't mean eating the same thing every meal and then taking a greens powder or a multivitamin, and that totally makes up for it.
Well, and
You
this
need
is where
to have
flexible
diversity.
dieting in its infancy, it was based around Dr. Joe saying, hey, if you don't like broccoli, have peas. If you don't like peas, but people went, oh, so I just got to hit my numbers. I'm just going to eat, you know, ice cream, and, you know, oh, now they came out with Halo Top, so now I can fit more ice cream. And then now they've come out with Walden Farms, so I can put syrup on everything. Before you know it, you're not even dieting anymore. You're just finding ways to fit in junk food that are low calorie options. And
Yeah.
now, you know, now I think people are coming back full circle, because I used to actually have people reach out to me and I'd be like, yeah, here's your approach. And they'd be like, oh, I don't want to do flexible dieting. I don't want to eat junk food. And I'd be like, what?
Yeah.
Why do you
I
have to
mean,
eat junk food?
the way I just look at it is by giving somebody macros, they're still eating whole foods. They're just kind of getting to choose what whole foods
Yeah.
they enjoy the most, right? Like if you don't like tilapia, okay, cool, have chicken or have a different type of white fish. Like you're just kind of getting to choose the whole foods that you actually enjoy and don't have to just like sit there and gag down.
I mean, we've had vegan clients, we've had vegetarian clients, you know, like, so, you know, ovo pescatarian, there's all these different, you know, morals and ethics around food and culture are ingrained in our society. You can't just ignore that because you want to be a bodybuilder, right? So yeah, I think that's the, honestly, it's exciting to think like, oh, I can choose the foods I want to eat and still reach my goals. For me, that's what got me to prep. When I watched that first video series of Lane prepping someone and them talking about this, I was like, hold up, they're eating regular food. They're just eating like their portions of it. And I remember trying it out and going, this is really easy. Because I think all of us have this fear of prep the first time, like, oh, it's going to be so hard to eat asparagus. And granted, I could probably do that for about a week before I'd quit.
It's like the what people kind of quote unquote refer to as the prep diet. And you know, not for
Literally made that video, Lexi. I had someone come up to me and be like, "Oh, I was on the prep diet," and I was like, "Oh, what's that?" Explain it.
well,
No, I was genuinely, what was it? And they're like, "Oh, there's this 7 foods, and you're only allowed to eat these
oh
7 foods." And it
god.
was like, chicken, tilapia, asparagus, oatmeal. I
You
forget
can
what they
piss
were.
off
They
with
were,
that nonsense.
yeah, it was literally, that's the only foods they were allowed to eat for the entire prep. And I was like, "How'd
Well,
that go?" "Oh, well, A, I was binge eating, and B, as soon as the
mhm.
show was over, I had literally stockpiles of food in my hotel room. Like, they had gone to the store, saved things, bought things, kept them in a bag. So when the show was over, they were going to eat them. They literally ordered a pizza at finals before finals was over. So it was there when they, like, and this is almost celebrated in bodybuilding culture. When I first got into it, people used to take a picture of their post-show treats and
Yep.
share it.
Uh,
Let me tell
Oh
you,
yeah.
like, one of my favorite things as a coach is that it's very normal, and probably it's just what most of my competitors do. All of our competitors do at this point. Show's over. I don't really want to go out to eat. I'm just going to go back to my
that's
room and go to bed. Yeah. Because I just fed them 350 grams of carbs 2 days in a row. The show is over. They don't really want to go out to eat. And guess what that leads to? You just go back to being normal. You don't have the guilt. You don't have the digestive issues. You don't have this, I don't know. It becomes almost like, I mean, I remember from my first show, because granted, you learn from your mistakes. I was a little too restrictive. And I just remember it was like opening up a floodgate of freedom because I was so restrictive. I was like, "Oh, I can have that now. I can have that now." And so I really try to encourage people to include things in the
yeah.
process so they're not waiting.
Well, and that's when it can kind of become scary and this can kind of tie into the dangerous prep protocols, but some girls, I mean, post show, if they're restricted for their entire prep with like 5 foods, they're struggling with hardcore like binging after a show. And I'm not just
Yeah.
talking a little bit of like, oh, I had a piece of cake and, a cookie or two, but like to the point where they're so out of control and out of tune with their body that like it's scary, right? And then they see that big influx on the scale, like, 10, 15 pounds maybe in a week. It happens. And that's not healthy on the body either. That's a big
No.
stressor, for the body to
Oh,
go,
they'll get edema. They'll have, their heart rate will be increased. That,
yep, yep.
they'll have, and then they inevitably go, "Oh, I'm going to go back on my diet and get this
Oh
right
yeah,
off,"
they think they can just go back
and
to
repeat that
prepping.
pattern.
Yeah, or unfortunately, those tend to be a lot of the girls that kind of, disappear too, because I mean,
Of
it's,
course.
they'll disappear, or, I hate to say it, those sometimes are the same people that blame prep for, their issues. And it's,
Oh,
yeah,
well, and they should blame that prep. They should
yeah,
blame they should blame the approach that was given to them. And this is our job now, is to show that
Yeah.
you can go in and out of prep and be a completely functional, high quality human being that does not display any characteristics of exercise obsession, eating disorders. Yes, prep is going to be hard. Listen, anything in life is hard. When people are like, "Oh, prep isn't healthy," I'm like, "Oh, you mean like driving a race car 250 miles an hour next to other race cars?
yeah. Every
That's not
every
healthy."
has their extreme.
How
Yeah.
about how about we take the fastest, strongest human beings in the world, put them on a field, and make them run into each other at full speed over and over again? That's healthy. So, like, healthy is this term that people like to, like, picture that, "Oh, well, I'm just gonna, do yoga on my couch all day and I'm healthy." No, like, part of health is expressing what it gets you excited. It gets me excited to diet down, to get shredded, to have to buy a new wardrobe and get on a stage where I'm probably way too thin and lean. But that's, for me, that gets me excited and it gets me jazzed up. So yeah, like, don't judge if it's healthy because you did it and it didn't work out for you and you did it in a bad manner. Health isn't just about the physical nature of things like the diet. It's about the mental approach of what gets you excited. Yeah.
Yeah. And we haven't even touched on like training stuff either, but there's one thing I really think is important to touch on, which is the going into show prep protocol of cutting water, cutting sodium, using diuretics. Because I think that is far and away short term the biggest health concern that we see in terms of practices.
Yeah.
Well, anytime you hear a bodybuilder dies at a bodybuilding show, Stephen, I know you probably do the same thing I do. Anytime they're within a week of the show, the day of the show, after the show, we kind of just know that they took a very aggressive approach to cutting water, cutting sodium, adding in some diuretics, you know, maybe even potassium loading. And for those that aren't familiar with, you know, the mechanics of the body, I'll let Stephen explain what
Yeah. I
impact
mean,
that has.
so your electrolyte balance needs to be in balance. Anytime something's out of balance, it essentially becomes and can become a poison, right? And so it can do harm. So if your electrolytes get really out of balance, like that's a problem. So you want to be aware, like that's why people are like, oh, I'm just going to take potassium. Like, well, what? Not necessary. But what happens is you are trying to dehydrate your body because for some reason there's this idea that it's going to make you look better. And so when you dehydrate, sure, you might lose some of that water that's maybe in the skin in that interstitial fluid, but most of the water is within the cells in your body. So you're also going to lose water in all of your muscles. So you're going to look flatter and it's going to have an impact there. That's not necessarily so much the bigger concern for your health as is things like blood volume. And so if your blood volume goes down, stroke volume in the heart goes down. Stroke volume is saying how much blood is pumped out of the heart in each pump. Okay. So if stroke volume goes down, heart rate has to increase to supply blood at the proper amounts to the rest of your body. And of course, if you're pumping up, if you're exercising, if you're doing stuff, that necessary amount goes up. And so now your heart's beating faster and beating faster, your heart rate's going up. Well, if you've been cutting sodium and you've been cutting water, you've been doing all that other stuff, remember sodium is really important for how your muscles function, for how they fire and relax and contract and relax. Your heart's a muscle, cardiac tissue, no different. So what ends up happening is some of these people literally give themselves heart attacks because their sodium balance is off, their fluid balance is off, and now you just don't have what you need. You're not either supplying enough blood to the heart and to the rest of the body, or it's just you're out of those electrolytes and sodium balance stuff, and you just can't keep contracting and relaxing appropriately. And it's I would say it's a pretty reasonable list of people that we know have died in bodybuilding, and that's probably not including plenty that we don't know about at amateur levels, other places in the world.
Yeah.
Because you do hear
Yeah, the
about those
ones we
sometimes
hear
too.
about tend to be the pros, or they're at a pro show. You know, there was a women's physique competitor that died in Tampa. We all heard about that because she had kids, and it was like she went to the hospital after finals and never came home, right? And you know, we've heard about some guys at the Olympia dying. So like that's the most extreme, right? Death doesn't get any more extreme than that. However, there are other problems with diuretics, dehydrating, that are going to impact your physique negatively along that spectrum. I think in the middle of that spectrum, what we deal with in the bikini division, what I've seen the most of over the years is girls just passing out, right? They'll be in the makeup chair the morning of the show, they're getting their spray tan the day before the show, and you know, like Stephen just said, like your blood volume gets so low. I've literally seen girls just standing erect, talking, having a conversation, and fall flat on their backs. Like I've witnessed that at a show, and it's just the blood volume. It's just not there, and you're pulling this water out of the body, and I think it's in an attempt to look leaner, right? I think everything is in an attempt to look leaner and harder. The problem being muscle is what 70-80% water, and at any given time when you're pulling water out of the body doesn't just go, hey, you know, it's really cool, we're just going to take the water right here underneath the skin but leave it everywhere else. So that balance, right, Stephen, it's managed by the minute, right? It's not like
Yes.
you're making these big changes. Everyone, you go stand in a sauna, you know, you're pretty lean, you stand in a sauna for 10 minutes and you sweat and you come out and you look amazing. Why? Because you just lost that layer of water right below the skin. But guess what? In 10 minutes, you look normal again. You don't get to keep that. That's the same thing with, you know, taking diuretics, lowering sodium, maybe reducing carbohydrates going into a show. You're taking a muscle that has a size and you're just depleting it. Now, maybe you've got enough muscle and you can get away with that, but not many of us do.
Yep. And I like to equate the skin to being like spandex. So like if you're in a bodysuit or something, you see like if you put it over your face, the harder you push out against that, the more detail you're going to see.
I'd like you to do that, please. Go get some spandex.
Yeah. Oh, I have the bodysuit over there. But essentially, like if I'm really flat, you can't really see as much as if I'm pushing out against it and I'm really full.
There,
you know,
there.
like you
Stephen's
just see
full.
more detail.
Yeah, that's exactly the description. And that's another thing. If you're using a dangerous prep protocol, like not having carbohydrates all prep, you're not seeing what your body looks like. But I'm telling you, like it will fuel you through prep if you are actually getting refeeds and you get to see what your muscles look filled out. It gives you the confidence to eat carbohydrates going into the show.
So I know
Water
that's the reason to
plus
watch us on
sodium
YouTube.
plus carbohydrates going into your muscle equals, that's going to be the thumbnail for the,
That I love that. I'll definitely relay that over. But I mean, that's also, I mean, that goes to why, as athletes, when you are depleted and you go into the gym, you know, you usually muscles don't look super full. You
no.
feel like you're tiny.
Well, and
You're not getting a
backstage at a show, you can't get a pump. You're like,
yeah,
yeah,
exactly.
Worse.
Yeah, because I know when I go into the gym and I, you know, and this is why I like to all my clients, I preach like I don't care how low your carbs get, always have carbs before you train. It's gonna, you know, not only fuel your workout, but your muscles are gonna be fuller. You're probably gonna be able to get a pump a little bit better. Same with sodium before your workout. It helps to give you that pump. So if you're cutting all that out and you're backstage trying to get a pump before you go on stage,
there
I
was a
mean,
phase where I used to eat a bouillon cube before I trained. I don't know if that was like
what
a
is that?
thing.
Thanks,
Wait, what is
Ryan.
Ryan Conley.
Yeah.
Wait,
Shout out. Shout out to you, big guy. The most
don't even think I
disgusting.
know what that is. Wait, what is it?
It's a flavor
essentially-
cube. Yeah, it's
You
like
use it for
for
soups.
cooking. Yeah,
Oh, okay. Interesting.
it's just
Mm.
basically like beef and salt. I don't know.
It's like 700 milligrams of salt in this little teensy cube.
Yeah. Now, well, Core Nutritionals makes these hydrate packets. And I remember the first time I used that, by the end of the workout, I was like, what is happening? I was like busting out of my skin. So if I ever like know I'm going to do a photo shoot or I want to look really good in the gym, I'll drop one of those hydrate packets with my pre-workout and just, yeah.
All right, I got to
Mhm.
tell you the story because I gave a hydrate packet to some guy at the gym like last week. I literally walked in the gym, sit down. There's this guy next there doing like shoulder presses or incline chest presses or something. And I'm like getting ready to start, and he starts like making some faces and stuff. I was like, oh, great, cool. I'm next to one of these guys. He's all in his stuff. And I finally took a minute, and I realized he was literally in the act of passing out. He passed out right as I sat down. Dude he hadn't had any water. He hadn't had any sodium. So like I actually gave him one of the hydrate packets and let him chill for a minute and sent him home. I was like, dude, you gotta take better care of yourself, man.
Yeah. I've done that backstage at shows. You know, when you see muscles on athletes like seizing, like if you ever see an athlete on stage and they look like they're going to fall over, it's usually because they've done these extreme protocols and their muscles literally are not firing. They're either locking up or cramping. And I remember I was at a show backstage and this kid was like, I don't know what to do. I can't like move. And I was explained to me what you've done over the last 24 hours. And like, yeah, no water, you know, the craziest thing. I literally gave him a full calorie Gatorade. He drank the whole thing. And within 10 minutes, he had veins. He was like, how did you know? And I was like, how do you not know? Like, I don't, the idea of peaking an athlete or peak week where you just do everything you've never done before the day before the show, it's so bizarre to me. You literally look amazing every day in the gym and go, you know what? I'm really going to just do everything the opposite of what I normally do and expect a really good result.
I know it's so yeah, I don't get it either.
It's
So.
completely counterintuitive to anything else, any other sport where you were like, and I think we think it's different because like we're just standing there and doing poses in bodybuilding, but we're not lifting weights. We're not running. Like there is no other sport where you would go in and you're like, you know what? I'm going to dehydrate before I have to perform. I know fight athletes do it, but they're all trying to rehydrate before
Well,
they
but they're
actually get in.
also, that's a 24-hour out. They're not doing it. We've done the powerlifting meets where you have a 2-hour weigh-in. No one's doing it with those.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So like it's you would just never do that if you really wanted to perform your best. But
right.
for some reason we think bodybuilding somehow.
Well, and I will say
translate
this, like if you get into the world of bodybuilding where they're taking multiple compounds, there is probably a sweet spot where they have to take a little bit and fill and, you know, they got to play with it because the hormones they're taking are causing extracellular fluid retention, right? That's just their nature. We're not involved in that. That's not the sport that we're involved in.
No.
I don't have anybody's death on my conscience. Nobody's, you know, brain dead. Nobody, like, I don't know. I don't know that I could ever come back from that. Like I have to wake up every morning and feel good about raising my kids in a world where I'm a coach. I can't imagine someone coaching my kid the way that these coaches coach people, I would
Yeah.
be in jail.
I mean, like you said, I don't even know how some of these people, like, how do you go to bed at night knowing that you're putting these athletes through some of these things, or knowing that you've had athletes who, like you said at the beginning, have liver failure, organ failure because of you, right? And I know people will argue, oh, well, the athlete is ultimately the one that, is doing what they're doing, but some athletes, when you're in the thick of it, you just can't think clearly, and like you
Well, you're
just
also hiring someone that's supposed to be professionally guiding you. That's where I have that. Yeah.
Yeah,
And have your best interest in mind.
exactly.
Yeah. Not their best interest, which is
Hey,
often the case. So, you know what? I
yeah.
love this topic so much. So what did you put on your Instagram? Lexi, you said, please send me your messages of dangerous
Oh,
policies.
yeah. So I put.
Why don't you send me a screenshot, because I'm going to put that on my story, and maybe we follow up on this and see if there's some more specific things that we're not covering, because we're already at 90 minutes almost, and I think it's good for today. It's such a robust topic. We didn't talk about training. We didn't talk about cardio protocols. Like there's more that we can get into here. Show strategies, how frequently you should be competing. You know, it's a great idea. Compete every other month for 3 years straight.
Or
Right? Like these are
or
things that we
Do I
didn't
have
get
to
a chance
win?
get into.
Do I have to be winning?
or like compete all year, take like a month off, call it your off season, and then I'm jumping back in prep.
Yeah. Yeah. So we
Uh,
can get into all of these things, but I think the foundational stuff, if you're on a meal plan and there's no variability in it, plug it into a macro calculator, see where your numbers are. If you're below 35, 40 grams of fat, red flags, ask your coach, why am I below this? Well, because that's what the pros do succeed. False. That's what this person does to succeed. But I can show you my athletes that are competing at the highest level of the sport, and that's why I want to get to this place where no one can dispute that what we're doing is the proper way. The method that we use is the way to prep people. And it's continuing to evolve. We're now getting involved in hormone therapy. And that's another thing we didn't even get into. We didn't get into drug protocols. We can talk about that as well. So Lexi, send me that. I'm going to make that a post, and maybe we can make this a little bit of a series. Like,
I love it. Dangerous
don't
prep
do
protocol.
don't do stupid things in prep.
Yeah. And going
Don't
back.
F your prep. Ooh, that kind of rhymes.
Don't F your. Oh yeah. And going back to what I think, Paul, you said this at the beginning. For anybody listening, if you're not coached by either one of us and you just have, a question, or, you're curious about something, like, don't ever hesitate to DM any of us. We're always happy to help and give you some guidance if you're just
And it
honestly.
always stays between us. If you guys have a question for
Yeah.
me, and it's not going to get back to your coach. That's not what I'm about. I'm not here to try to get people away from their coaches. And what would make me the happiest person in the world, it's happened a few times, would be if someone's coach reached out to me and said, hey, my athlete said you're doing this. How come? Because guess what? That's what I do. I reach out to other coaches all the time. And I go, hey, what'd you do here? Like this, I like, like that's how the sport gets better, by making everyone raise their quality of skill, not just continuing to do the same shitty protocols and expecting you're going to get better athletes, better results.
I'm screwed then.
Ruh-roh.
Ruh-roh, Raggy.
All right, guys. Happy Tuesday.
Awesome. Love it. Bye, guys.
All right.